Hello, thank you for joining us this evening. We're delighted that you've chosen to spend the next 19 minutes with us. I'm Professor Rajinder Dudra. I'm Professor of Cultural Studies and Creative Industries at Birmingham City University, and I'm your chair for today's panel discussion. Our Creative Multilingualism for Shape event has been brought to you by the Creative Multilingualism Research Network based at the University of Oxford and is funded by the Faculty of Modern Languages. Our research network arises from a 4-year project, itself entitled Creative Multilingualism, which ran from 2016 to 2020. Creative Multilingualism was funded by the AHRC as one of its research programs commissioned under the Open World Research Initiative. My colleague, Professor Catherine Cole from Jesus College at the University of Oxford, and myself are the research network's current co-directors, and our Creative Multilingualism Research Network runs until 2025. From both Catherine and myself, welcome, and thank you again for joining us. We're also grateful to our colleagues in Torch, the Oxford Research Centre in Humanities, who are supporting the online delivery of tonight's panel. So thanks to our colleague Nikki and others behind the scenes. I'm delighted to introduce our esteemed panel members, some of whom have been part of Creative Multilingualism since its inception. So we're going back to 2014, 2015, when we were penning down the ideas for the application, and other colleagues who are working in related areas across the theme of today's session. So let me introduce them, please. Our first colleague is Patricia Daly from the University of Oxford. She's Professor of the Human Geography of Africa. She's also Vice Principal of Jesus College and member of the university's Race Equality Task Force. Patricia specialises in forced migration, political ecology and Africa, and she's also been named in the Black Power list as one of the most influential Black people in Britain in 2021. Professor Claire Guerrera from Cardiff University is Dean for Research and Innovation for the University College of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences, and is a Professor of French Studies. Claire is also chair of the University Council of Modern Languages, which is part of the SHAPE initiative. My colleague Wen Chin-Young from SOAS, University of London, is one of the colleagues part of Creative Multilingualism from the outset, and she's Professor of Arabic and Comparative Literature. Wen Chin's research on Arabic Chinese literature has been developed in the context of Silk Road studies and moves across many disciplines. She's also a fellow of the British Academy, which founded SHAPE. Professor Matthew Reynolds from the University of Oxford and also Creative Multilingualism from its inception is Professor of English and Comparative Criticism. Matthew's innovative concept of prismatic translation opens up the concept of language difference. In 2017, he set up the interdisciplinary master's course, the MST in Comparative Literature and Critical Translation. And finally, and certainly not least, is my colleague Sophia Tyre from Steamhouse at Birmingham City University. Sophia is the Business Engagement Manager at Steamhouse, a BCU initiative designed to forge connections between the creative industries and STEAM disciplines. Steamhouse acts as a collaborative innovation hub, bringing together artists, inventors, entrepreneurs, academics, designers, engineers, and innovators. And I know I've been using the acronym SHAPE and STEAM. Some of us will be familiar with them, but if you're not, don't worry, all will be clear in the next few minutes. The structure of the event will be, after my kind of opening few comments, I'm going to ask a question each of our panelists. They are going to speak and respond for 5 minutes. Then we're going to have a brief discussion amongst ourselves, and we're then going to open the floor to questions, comments and observations. So please do get ready with any of your queries, questions or comments. We really want you to be part of this discussion and part of this network via the chat box as well. The event is being recorded, so if you're shy and you don't want to be recorded, then of course just put your comments in the chat box or your questions in the chat box. But if you would like to come forward and be seen on screen, which will be great and we'd like that interaction, then just let us know that you write your question in the chat box and say happy to come on screen, and it usually takes a few seconds, 20-30 seconds, and Nikki behind the scenes will bring you in. And if not, we'll read out the questions and the panelists will respond via the chat box and through the on-screen interactivity. So today's event, Creative Multilingualism for Shape. Our research network very much wanted to be in dialogue with the possibilities that an understanding of shape offers. And creative multilingualism has been working within the context of languages, the creative inputs of languages, the challenges and possibilities of doing languages in the 21st century in UK higher education institutions, but also through our various cultural stakeholders and cultural partners. So we were very much interested to respond to the idea of shape from our kind of linguistic and interdisciplinary background. So that's where a lot of my colleagues this afternoon, this evening will be coming from, but also broadening it out to the wider issues that shape is seeking to discuss tonight. So we see ourselves as being part of the acronym SHAPE, as developing or thinking about ideas related to shape across our varied disciplines in the social sciences, arts and humanities, as well as the work we do with our cultural partners in our everyday working lives across a range of different sectors. So what is SHAPE then? SHAPE is the acronym which stands for Social Sciences, Humanities and Arts for People and the Economy. And I would like to name check another of our colleagues who is Professor Aditi Leary, also from the University of Oxford, and our linguistic strand from our original Creative Multilingualism project. And Aditi was Vice President of the British Academy and very much part of the development and the conceiving of the idea of shape. SHAPE was launched in the summer of 2020 by the British Academy, London School of Economics and Arts Council England. The purpose of the initiative was to mobilise disciplines in the social sciences, humanities and arts in a landscape increasingly dominated by the STEM disciplines. The British Academy launched its Shape the Future initiative in May 2020 to bring insights from the social sciences, humanities and arts together to understand how we can shape a positive future for people, the economy and the environment post-pandemic. I'm sure a lot of us are thinking about there's hope with the inoculations, but also coming out of the pandemic. But what does that mean and how will a new economy, a new society look like, not least with the shape subjects very much at the heart of that, not just in terms of answering questions about COVID, but also helping to restructure the arts, the economy, the way we think about the world coming out of, hopefully, the pandemic. So the shape disciplines have a critical role to play in the handling of and recovery from the pandemic. And to some extent, tonight's event is also an extension of some of the issues that we take up for further discussion, the original issues that the Shape the Future initiative had set about. But we're very much rooting and anchoring that through our kind of linguistic and interdisciplinary backgrounds. So what about the other acronyms? We've just talked about SHAPE, but there's also STEAM and STEM. Some of us will be aware of recent debates in media and higher education press related to educational edicts via our current government about the perceived higher value and worth of STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering and math, over the SHAPE disciplines and the possible funding implications this might have. So it's almost kind of pitting STEM against non-STEM subjects in a not very helpful way. In one sense then, we are definitely arguing against this position and advocating for the importance of our SHAPE subjects and the value and worth they bring to a wide variety of people and the economy. For us, this is not an either-or dichotomy, falsely pitting STEM and SHAPE disciplines against each other. As the thisisshape.org UK website nicely puts it, and I'm quoting from them, SHAPE subjects teach us to analyse, interpret, create, communicate and collaborate with rigour, clarity and energy. These are crucial skills for today. And together with STEM subjects, and I think that's the key, and together with STEM subjects, they help us make innovation work hard for the benefit of everyone. At the same time, they bring colour, texture, opinion and perspective to our everyday. So SHAPE subjects are very much at the heart of what it means to be human, but human as a wider and complex economy, absolutely, of which technology, innovation, and the sciences are widely a part. Alongside the acronym of SHAPE, we will also be discussing the idea of STEAM. Now, STEAM was originally conceived in the United States, particularly in the kind of educational settings and also innovation sectors across technology. And it's currently being pioneered in the UK by my own institution, Birmingham City University, through its multi-million-pound investment and development of a STEAM house building. And the STEAM House building is a networking facility, and also will put forward a forthcoming STEAM curriculum. In a similar way that SHAPE advocates for the arts and humanities, STEAM also puts the arts at the centre of science, technology, engineering and maths in transdisciplinary ways to address some of our pressing local and global issues. So, for example, how might artists and scientists best come together to tackle some of the issues that global warming is putting our way? How, for instance, might artists and scientists address some of the local issues of local economy development that might be happening in our geopolitical regions up and down the country? So with these opening comments from myself, just to kind of set the scene, introduce the panel, let me now turn to our panelists with a question each. I'm first going to turn to my colleague Wen Chin. Hello, Wen Chin. And I'd first like to ask, as part of your 6 minutes, please, how is SHAPE moving us beyond disciplinary silos? Thank you.
Thank you, Rajinda, and thank you very much for your beautiful sort of like introduction. You have already explained in your introduction how SHAPE has opened up disciplinary boundaries and brought a number of disciplines together. And those of you who are familiar with the report that the British Academy published in October 2020, the COVID-19 has made it almost urgent that the social scientists, the political scientists, the medical professionals, the development studies people, anthropologists, communication experts to all come together in order to sort of respond to the COVID-19 that has ravaged the entire global community. As I note the absence of languages and the non-European and the humanities in these reports, I want to turn attention to the possibilities of further collaboration between the social sciences and the humanities. And as I speak, a team of SOAS colleagues continues to gather information about the ways in which different linguistic communities in London are responding to COVID-19. Their work on cultural translation and interpreting of COVID-19 risk is a UKRI AHRV COVID-19 research project. From preliminary statistics published today, we can see that multilingualism is at work in how migrant communities access information. Most migrant communities access information outside the UK and in languages other than English, and the information they read comes from formal news channels, as well as social media, tabloids, and collective wisdom inherited from a history of managing pandemics going around in their global communities through, let us say, chat on their mobile phones. Just as a new coronavirus has connected the fate of the entire globe, multilingualism and technology have also brought the globe into one destiny as we struggle together to contain the spread of COVID-19. As we are seeing these days, closing down national borders has not helped any country contain the spread of the virus. And more importantly, we see clearly the impact of politics of truth on social behavior. Two examples, right? One is come in a set of questions. Do we get vaccinated or not? Which vaccine should we go for? How do we assess individual risk? And individual decisions are entangled in the tension between the individual and the collective, between weighing the life-threatening potential of the vaccine to individuals and how this will affect how the safety of the entire global community is managed. Where do we turn for a space to work out the moral conundrum facing us today to help us navigate through the complex entanglement between individual safety and communal needs? I want to put forward that global humanities located in multilingualism and word literature can be that space. This has been the space where similar issues have been raised, interrogated, and translated into everyday conduct. I now come to an Arabic example from the 11th century. Ibn Butlan, a Christian physician from Baghdad who left behind a work on medicine and another on his travels in the Middle East, chose a literary form, the classical Arabic maqama, to write about the attitude of the physician towards illness, and particularly the plague of 1154-55. and their patience, and more importantly, truth about the plague. Ibn Butlan does not deign to tell us what the truth is, but dramatizing the politics of truth, the details that go into each version and the cost of these in actual lives lost, he makes visible and tangible the consequences of each thought and action on individuals and their community. This is the role literature has always played and can still play if we adjust our academic approach to literature. As early as 2008, Rita Felsky examined the use of literatures in her book, The Use of Literatures, the Paradox Pervasive in Academic Study of Literature. Critics justified the importance of their work by focusing on the uniqueness of the literary work, and by doing so, privileging distinctiveness, difference, and otherness. For in the view of many, the otherness of literature is precisely the source of its radical transformative potential. However, separating literature from everything around it, critics fumble to explain how works of art arise from and move back into the social world. And the role of the humanities in the social world is my interest here. Felsky goes on to say, highlighting literature's uniqueness, they overlook the equally salient realities of its own connectedness. By calling her book Uses of Literature, she proposes pluralizing reading practices to include the familiar political and ideology, and at the same time, to go beyond these to engage with the worldly, with the everyday. The four-part process of textual engagement she delineates: recognition, enchantment, knowledge, and shock, brings literature back to the configuration of social knowledge. And this social knowledge, tailored for the COVID-19 situation, is what we need now and what word literature can offer. Thank you.
Thank you, Wen-Chin. That was wonderful, and really thank you for keeping to time. A couple of points that I've certainly picked up on there, but we'll move on to our next panelist. Claire, how can we enhance understanding of the value of languages through shape, please?
Thank you very much, Regina. Thank you for letting me put this wonderful panel. I think I've got a slide. If I could ask Nikki to put my slide up, please. Thanks, Nikki. Lovely. So, colleagues, what I'm giving you here is a very practical example of how languages are already shaped. And what I've given you here, I'm going to talk through, is an event that we undertook in Oxford, actually, in 2018, where we took 40 school children from the whole of Wales to Oxford to try and think about how languages can help us see the world differently. And this programme was very much about trying to put languages and language learning at the heart of cross-curricular experience and also learning. I'm going to talk you through my lovely graphic facilitation to sort of talk about how languages are already shaped, and how languages in many ways are part of the SHAPE initiative, and in many ways have preempted what we might consider some of the SHAPE key coordinates. So as you can see from my slide here, you can, on the screen now, we organised a day around 3 events, and these 3 events are very much how our languages and language learning are informed by and do inform other parts of the curriculum and inform other subjects. So the first square box you can see there is around colour, clearly in Welsh below it, obviously from Wales. And this was very much a programme about looking at how languages are very much part of the STEAM initiative. So this first part of our residential day, we asked our young people to look at chemistry and colour chemistry, and how chemical properties and chemical colours could create new shades, new intonations of colour. And each of those experiments produced a colour which had to then be given a particularly new term that had to be a creative, multilingual approach to looking at language across cultures. So many of our students there created words that were half Welsh, half French, brought in Spanish, brought in Arabic, brought in Japanese. And it was all about trying to show how chemistry itself as a subject is one that, and its language programs and vocabulary are informed massively by the whole notion of the language background of science and the medical humanities. So I think in a very, very early way, this program talks about how languages are shaped and have shaped the world of chemistry and the cultural histories of the way in which we look at some of the basic elements of building of science. The second box here was the second exercise, And this shows how language is very much connected to visual cultures and particularly history. In this box here, you can see our students talking about decoding and recoding languages. And for this particular exercise, we asked our students to work with a dead language, Ogham. You can see here on my slide here, a language that's now extinct that would have been used here in the British Isles. And the students had to write their names, write sentences, and translate and reconstruct Ogham from some of the basic building blocks of the language that we have today available to us, via, to some extent, archaeology. And this is about looking at visual cultures, because we began with emojis, we began looking at visual languages, and how visualization of language and visual coordinates help us understand language today and create and look at and provide hidden meanings that come to the fore. So this part of the program here was very much about looking at history, visual cultures, archaeology through the prism of language, and how languages and language coordinates and language building blocks are key to the ways in which we explore and reconstruct the past. So from chemistry and the cultural history of the elements to visual cultures and art, the last part of our program in the box here with the person with the curly yellow hair with the 3D mask on, this is about looking at the space station, International Space Station, and how on the International Space Station, the languages used are Russian and English, and there has come to play, because those are the two main languages, Runglish, a mixture of Russian and English. And we asked the young people here to have 3D sets, to go on a 3D journey of the space station, and to use a glossary of Russian and English terms to communicate between themselves, between Russian and English. And this is about looking to see how physics, chemistry, space travel, exploration are all about the cultural mediation between different organizations, different countries that have been at the forefront of our explorations in space. So here we were linguifying physics, talking about how communication is core to the scientific endeavor of being part of, as it were, exploration and the physics of space. So in all of these three exercises, languages were very much shaped by STEAM, by art, by chemistry, and by physics. And the aim was to show how languages are core to cross-curricular learning, they're core to our understanding of the world around us and beyond, and how languages open doors to other worlds. And that was our last little bit of the screen here about to further adventures, a little person going through as it were, a hole in space, a sandpit, a black hole, to sort of show how the language program and languages really make one reconsider not only a language as core to communication, but as core to the coordinates around parts of the curriculum and the program. So I wanted to sort of maybe end here, Rajinder, by saying that SHAPE as an initiative was already there, it pre-exists in the way in which we teach and understand languages. And with the right, I suppose, approach, methodology, mindset, and I suppose means, we can begin to review how the language program of our schools and beyond can be reconceptualized to bring SHAPE to the fore. Thank you.
Again, thank you very much, Claire. Really, some really interesting thoughts there that I'll definitely be picking up. Sophia, how can we quantify the value of the creative arts, and should we do so? Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Nikki, could I have my slides, please? Thank you very much. So I'm Sophia Tarr. I'm the Business Engagement Manager for STEAM House. STEAM House is a collaborative innovation space which is currently supported by the European Regional Development Fund, Birmingham City University, in partnership with Eastside Projects, which is an arts organisation. STEAM House in Digbeth is a prototype. It's a prototype space that we've used to power our vision. So at the moment we support SMEs that are looking to develop new prototypes and new services, and that includes artists, from product makers, product designers. Next slide, please, Nikki. So why is STEAM at the heart of everything we do? As Rajinder said, the STEAM stands for the science, technology, engineering, arts and mathematics. And Birmingham was founded on this crest, which is the artist and the engineer. And it's very, very close to our hearts. And that's what's powered our vision going forward. Next slide, please, Nikki. So what is STEAM and why is STEAM important? you know, we've said in the past that some people think it's about putting the arts in the science or the science in the arts, but we believe that the collaboration of having the arts within that mix makes it more interesting. We feel that it brings out new ideas, and we pride ourselves on our STEAM principles, which are around the collaborations. The arts brings in the collaborations, the conversations, the exploration, newness and openness to develop new ideas and new products. And we're very passionate about that. We're not saying that it has to be part of everyone's ethos, but we believe that it does lead to something really interesting. And we're not saying that science or arts is more important than science, but they complement each other. And that's what we try to get across to our students, academics and businesses that we work with. So I've mentioned that STEAM House is a prototype, but we are just about to move into a new location. Nikki, could you change the slides for me, please? And this is our new Belmont Works. It's called Phase 2. This is a new project for us because we will be inviting artists, students, academics, corporate companies to work under one roof. And that's in order to support the ecosystem. We believe that the creativity within the arts will help to drive the economic growth within the region, and it will also help to develop new products and new ideas going forward. This is something that will be live for BCU next year, actually. So it's a prototype that we've developed, but we're looking to ingrain in our educational system going forward. Next slide, please, Nikki. So as the last slide says, good things come to those who collaborate. We really believe that collaboration is the way forward. We believe that the arts allows you to enter into that process. It invites new minds to come under one roof, and we're hoping that this new location and also the STEAM methodology will enable the arts to show how valuable it is. It's sometimes tricky to quantify the impact that the arts has, but it is really something that creates excitement, and it does develop new ideas, and that's what we're keen to take forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophia, and a lovely example of a kind of of practice, and not just in terms of theory, but to do, which we'll pick up as well. How do we put this together logistically as well, bring shape to life through the projects that both Wenxin, Claire and yourself have talked about. Lovely. Patricia, please, an important term that's on many of our tongues and in many of our kind of minutes and meetings is diversity, but does it mean anything, and can we do anything with it realistically? How can shape empower diversity? Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you, Rajinder. A focus on shape, social sciences, humanities and the arts would lead to a recognition of the employability of the holders of these degrees, and the contributions these subjects can make to personal development and to the wider society. And these have implications for diversity. As a geographer and a shape discipline, I'm excited by the prominence of my subject in interpreting and addressing future challenges, especially environmental and climate change and pandemics. We have seen physical scientists joining my department because of the interdisciplinary nature of geography. And there's a recognition that there's greater understanding that knowledge production is not just about abstract scientific facts derived from statistical modeling, but also about community, local knowledges and public engagement. And this necessitate researching with other tools that are popular in shape subjects. if young people are focusing on the health, young people are interested in the health of our planet, then that health can be studied in all shapes, subjects. Aspects of sustainability and planetary stewardship can be addressed in environmental humanities, environmental economics, and environmental geography, and so on. And the pandemic, which we have seen a shaped report on, produced by the British Academy, although geography wasn't mentioned in particular, but certainly there's can be attention to geographical space in relation to the urban and also geopolitics. And we've seen the rise of a sort of what some people could term vaccine nationalism, but also vaccine geopolitics in terms of who have which parts of the world have access to the vaccine. So from my shape subjects then, and certainly the discipline of geography is important to understanding some of these challenges that we're facing in the contemporary period. In terms of equality, in my discipline, data has shown that there's an increased number of Black and minority students taking geography, particularly at GCSE level. And I think that's partly because of the interest in the environment and climate change. But this is not yet translated into higher numbers at A level and at university. And we're hoping that SHAPE can help with that leap forward. In terms of diversifying academia and student recruitment, we know there's an assumption among certain global communities that SHAPE subjects, and probably with the exception of law, are not valued because they do not lead to established professions that generate almost immediate employability and high income. And that more investment might be needed, whether in financially or time, to build the networks and connections that would lead to benefits of employment in SHAPE subjects. And these may take longer and often are not seen as commensurate with their levels of education. But we should not dismiss this perception. It reflects a reality, but thankfully that is changing. SHAPE can help us to encourage BME students and their parents to see the writing, critical thinking, creative skills, communicative skills as essential building blocks for most careers. And I think this process, as I say, is starting to change. In terms of the recruitment of academics, there's a recognition that now that BME academics might work in areas that are not central to the learning priorities of some universities or departments. And many BME academics work on issues that may be of concern to communities in other parts of the world or in their own communities in Britain. And these may be marginal, as I said, to the academic priorities of the department. And in order to diversify, we need to encourage the take-up of these different areas of study within universities and our departments more widely. From a geographical perspective, and certainly I've been interested in some of what we call the decolonial turn within my discipline. And one scholar from the Global South, or writer from the Global South, whom we've been engaged with, is that of the Kenyan writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who in his book, Decolonizing the Mind, The Politics of Language in African Literature, published in 1986, provides a framework for us in African studies to address some of the decolonizing ideas that might be of interest. And following the Black Lives Matter movement, and focus on racial equality and political perception. I mean, I'm not a linguist, but I'm aware that the production of language is quite important in this debate. The production of language of defiance is central in the promotion of racial equality, in the promotion of political participation of marginalized groups. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. I'm sure we'll come back to the decolonial turn in the conversation. Matthew, what can shaped disciplines contribute to addressing the long-term impact of COVID, particularly through a broader understanding in and through the languages? Thanks.
Okay, thanks, and thanks. It's lovely to be part of the panel, and also really interesting to be coming last. I don't have a script or a slide because I thought one of the things I could do is pick up on some of what's been said already and bring it to bear on this very kind of urgent and raw question that I've been given to respond to. So the long-term challenges of COVID, what does that mean? Well, one of the things it obviously means is coming to terms with what COVID has made newly visible and newly urgent about our society, which is to say there's a new kind of visibility to the structural inequalities and injustices that have come to light through how COVID has played out. I think obviously many factors go into this, and here I'm kind of slightly picking up on what Patricia said at the end of her presentation. So obviously there are many deep-rooted factors in play here, including race, including class, including economic factors. And obviously the combination of shaped disciplines is crucial in addressing and coming to understand these things. But I want to suggest, and here I'm picking up on what Patricia said as well, I want to suggest that thinking about language and thinking about translation is really important and has a crucial role to play as well. And the reason for this is that people express their identities, they express themselves, groups express themselves through language difference. So, this can be a matter of speaking what we think of as being different named languages. So speaking Polish, or speaking Gujarati, or speaking Arabic, or speaking Portuguese, speaking any of the different languages that are spoken in the United Kingdom. And here I think of myself as kind of reaching back to the point when Shin made right at the beginning about the importance of recognizing multilingualism as part of the kind of fabric of the society of the UK. But it's also a matter of using language differently, even when you're speaking what can be labeled as English. I think it's really important to see that the names we have for languages are abstractions, and that people relate to language in very different ways, and they manifest language in many different ways, so that somebody can be speaking English, speaking what's labeled English, and somebody else can be speaking something else, something that in a way that can count as English, and they can not really be understanding each other. They can be using language very differently and relating to it very differently. So I think recognizing the variety of manifestations of language is crucially important. And I think it's important in two ways. One is about reaching people. So one is this is a challenge of translation, and recognizing that translation isn't just a matter of, as it were, language in the narrow sense. It's not something that you deal with Google Translate or with a dictionary. Translation is a matter of reshaping, of understanding, of cultural interaction. It's crucially also a matter of listening. So that translation is a two-way thing. It's not just kind of putting something across. So I think recognizing the kind of intrinsicness of language difference among, everywhere in society, and the importance of being alert to what's involved in translation as a way of bridging that is really important going forward. The other thing I want to say, though, and this connects to the theme of creative multilingualism, is that language difference is a really important resource for and source of creativity. And it's obvious to see why this is, because what does language difference, what does a variety of different ways of using language, of speaking language, what does that give you? It gives you a whole repertoire of different ways of expressing, a whole repertoire of different ways of seeing and saying things. And that's what, creativity comes from that, because creativity is about imagining, seeing, expressing, making things in new ways. And so this very kind of varied, endlessly varied and shifting repertoire of language use feeds into creativity. And I think the creativity that's nourished by language difference is a really important resource in bringing communities together, and also in sort of coping with the difficulties that we face. And I'm just going to, if I've got time, I just want to give a kind of personal instance of this. So my parents at the end of their lives spent 2 really terrible years in a care home. And this was in fact just before COVID. And because it was before COVID, I was able to spend a lot of time there with them. And the care home was a very multilingual environment. So the people who looked after my parents, the ones I particularly remember and I'm grateful to, were from Poland, they were from Kerala in South India, they were from Sri Lanka, and they were from Jamaica. So these were extremely skilled nurses who had migrated to the UK to work in the NHS. And so what they brought with them was their professional skill, but also what they brought with them was a repertoire of different ways of speaking, different ways of being, different ways of feeling, different ways of handling end of life, different ways of handling illness and grief. And I learned from that. So that these people who looked after my parents also looked after me. And part of the way they did that, and this is quite tricky to express, but part of the way they did that comes from the language difference and the cultural difference that they brought into the room. Because what happens, I think, when you're in a very difficult situation like that is you feel kind of stuck. You know, grief is a sort of emotional, it's a sort of, I don't know, sort of stuckness. And you're looking for ways of handling it. You're looking for ways of expressing it. You're looking for ways of moving forward. And I learned from these different people who brought different ways of responding into the room. I learned a tone of voice, or I learned that it's possible to laugh at something that I didn't think it was possible to laugh at before. Or they shared a proverb, or I heard an experience from quite a different context of life than the context of life that I was familiar with, or I just learned a new gesture. And so what I'm not saying here is different cultures are much better at dealing with death and end of life than the uptight British are. What I am saying is that language difference and cultural difference brings with it a repertoire that all of us can learn from. Different ways of feeling, different ways of speaking, different ways of behaving. And for me, in that difficult situation, this became part of what helped me to get through it. So that's a very kind of personal and particular, and for me also, the crucial thing I want to add there is that for me, this is part of creativity. Creativity is part of that. So learning to do something new in that way, learning to see something differently, there's an everyday creativity there. And here I'm sort of hooking back also to what Wen-Chin said at the beginning about the continuity between the creativity of literature and the creativity of everyday life. So what I'd like to suggest is that as we move forward culturally now, the kinds of things that that happened to me there can also happen and can also be helped to happen in different situations, which is to say, this, you know, amazing repertoire, variety of ways of feeling and means of expression that language difference offer us, you know, give us ways of making sense, not only through the sort of thing I experienced, but through stories, through dramatic performances, through all kinds of human interaction in language. So what I want to say then is that language difference, recognizing language variety, nourishes creativity, and creativity helps us in all sorts of ways to make sense of difficult times and move on through them. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. And I think that slogan, "the personal is political," really does come to mind there, because I think you really opened up from the local literally to the political and the global. Really, really appreciate that. Thank you. Now I think all my colleagues will come on the screen miraculously via the powers of technology. Yes. Just waiting for Claire to come on and Patricia. That's great. And whilst they're coming on, so thank you again to my panelists, one for keeping to time, but also really for responding to the questions in the spirit of openness, but also in the spirit of interdisciplinarity, shape and STEAM, and multilingualism too. So I think you really did press all the buttons there. But if I may, shape, STEAM, these are acronyms, they are. Are they gimmicky, or actually are they being listened to by the powers that be where it matters? So for instance, and I may direct this to Claire and Sophia first, but others do come in as well. Are people listening to us? Are the politicians listening to us? Are government agencies listening to us? Are the people who have the ear of government listening to us? And where is the evidence for that? Or, you know, we could forever make up acronyms to argue our case. So shape and STEAM, is anybody listening, and is it making an impact? Claire and then Sophia, please.
Yeah, thanks, Virginia. Yes, I think that it is the case that the term is gaining greater currency. I was very enthused to find out just last week that in questions in Parliament, a Labour MP actually posed a question to Michelle Donnellan, the Universities Minister, about the value of shape to the UK economy, and posing the very direct question about the value that creative arts education brings to the UK economy. And that colleague shaped the question as about shape. Now, obviously, the minister did not reply back herself using that term if we look at the Hansard response, but very clearly, I think it's very, thought-provoking, and it's certainly, I was enthused by the fact that colleagues discussing the future of education and the future of the economy, and that's the E, and in shape, it could be economy, it could be environment, are understanding that for this particular, and again, UK government, not devolved government, where I think it's a different picture, agenda, which I can talk about if one would wish. For the UK government, the economic argument for shape is the primary conduit in. So I think in order to have the ear of the current administration, one has to be mindful that is a primary consideration. But the fact that it became part of the debate, I think, is very enthusing. Looking more broadly at the range of learning societies, and I have been involved with those as the chair of the University Council of Modern Languages, there is a greater recognition of the common value of scaling up lobbying around shape. So at a recent event actually held by the British Academy, there was a good discussion about how our common interests, from archaeology to languages to art history, to sociology, how our common interests were served by scaling up lobbying around the shape agenda rather than fragmenting around individual asks. And I think that's a very important part of shape. It becomes a platform for lobbying for the value of the collective values of our disciplines, rather than what could be a rather divide and conquer if we begin to fragment around, subject specific concerns. So in terms of like identity and community of practice and scaling up endeavour, it's helpful. And at the moment, the UK government, I'm not saying in Wales, the UK government is being obliged to listen to shape as a term being used by the opposition.
Thank you, very useful. Sophia, Steve.
Great. Yes, it's a slow drip, but I do think that it is making ground. We have a lot of international and European partners that are implementing the STEAM methodology. And I think especially with the way that the educational system is changing, and we're being faced with the changes in digital technology, that's going to change the way that young people and businesses learn going forward. So that STEAM methodology, bringing things together, collaborating, trying new things, is going to be the way forward. I think just specialising in one area is going to be old school, to be honest. I think we're going to have to mix it up. And I think the STEAM methodology will allow us to do that.
Right, thank you, lovely. Any of our other panelists like to come in on that, on acronyms and on the value and worth of STEAM or shape? Anybody? Patricia.
Yes, thank you. Obviously, I have experience in some African countries where there have been great summer attempts to put emphasis on STEM. And I would say rightly so, in a sense, in that, in some parts of the world, there's some some groups, for example, in Asia, I think you might have overrepresentation of interest in STEM subjects, but in Africa, less so. And in the UK, again, different ethnic groups are sort of differentially represented in these areas. So I can understand the focus on STEM, the attempt to get women into STEM, the attempt to get young Black people into STEM, and recognize the value of having a science education and so on. But at the same time, right, there is also now a growing acknowledgement that you can't just do the science without understanding the philosophy of science. So some of there's one university in Ghana, for example, that started off as a sort of business and STEM university and have had to introduce philosophy. Critical thinking. If you want to be creative, you don't just come up with models and so on. There's a lot of critical thinking that goes into the models before the statistics are produced or to produce the statistics. So that, and I think that's important. Now there's gradually starting to introduce, shape subjects into STEM, and I think it just shows you the value of shape subjects, that we can't abandon them and assume that society can function effectively, that we can't ask political questions or other questions because we are focusing on the science. And I think that realization is sort of gradually manifesting itself.
That's wonderful.
And it's good.
Great. And just before I ask my next question to the panelists, if we could have the questions comment chat open, please. So this is really to our audience. So feel free at any point now to ask your questions or comments or observations. Feel free to put them in the chat box. And just to remind you again, if you would also like to come on screen as well, you have that option. You don't have to, of course, but we would very much welcome it. So just when you put in your question or comment, do let us know that you would like to come and ask your question in person, and then we will allow that to happen. But as we're talking, do devise your questions or comments and put them in the Q&A in the chat box in the Zoom as well. Lovely. Wen-Chin, I was really taken by what you said about multilingual and migrant communities of really accessing information in a variety of ways. Do we think that SHAPE gives us that tools, allows us that tools for a new generation to interact? And I'm not just talking about simple translation of NHS documents on a leaflet, as important as that is, but also perhaps through some of the new technological modes that we've talking about. We mentioned digital media here. So in what ways can SHAPE equip us as we move forward through a 21st century, but also a 21st century which is increasingly digital, as well as one which is increasingly multilingual and migrant-based, particularly in the large urban conurbations?
Okay, I'm going to sort of start backward, sort of like as I was speaking, and this is personal as well, and because of the proliferation of media and news, including rumors and real information, false informations that get circulated around the globe, not just within a nation or within a community, within a city, right? What's happening is really, this crisis of confidence in the kind of information that we receive. So, and this has an impact on not just how we individuals respond to, let's say, news and information about COVID or vaccines and so on and so forth, but it is also about how we relate to each other in a sort of like social sense. And I want to sort of like pick up from what you said earlier about what's personal is political, but also in this case, what's personal is social, right? So this is about new ways of thinking about who we are as person, but also who we are as community. And if there is any kind of crisis about a crisis of confidence about the information you receive, then where do we establish, right, our social relations? Who do we trust? Who do we need? Whom don't we trust? And who is our community? And who is our society? And so on and so forth. And this opens up a can of questions about our relationship to science, our relationship to medical practices, and so on and so forth. So it is really the entire social fabric is at stake. But I think one of the things that we can do in terms of SHAPE, bringing social sciences, for example, and the humanities together, is begin to think of politics of the truth, analyze that, but also think in terms of what a colleague would love to say, critical media studies, right? Where do we draw the line between, truth and untruth, something like this. So I think, and sort of the politics and the value and sort of like how do we access truth and where would we find that information, could be one of the areas that the STEM can, bring us together.
Very interesting. Any of our other panelists like to come in on that? Matthew and then Claire.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it's a really sort of really good instance of the need to bring different disciplines together in order to understand one thing, which is to say, what might seem really simple, sending an email to someone or a text message or, taking part in this conversation, there's so much at stake in it. It's to do with technology, obviously, it's to do with economics, like it's expensive, who has access to it and who doesn't. So it's, there's a really significant political issue. There's legal regulation. There's the environment, because this technology that we use so easily the whole time uses loads of electricity and is damaging to the environment, etc. So just the really, what might seem to any of us using, these media to be just the simplest thing of just saying something to someone, as soon as you just kind of think about it for a moment, you see the extremely wide and complicated ramifications that it has, that you need to bring together the different shape disciplines in order to understand. It's almost a kind of paradigmatic kind of case for the need for shape, I think.
Thank you, Matthew. Claire.
Yeah, I just want to come into on when she's pointing there about sort of, critical studies, and I think what I've been really intrigued by recently was a call for papers for a critical modern languages pedagogy conference. And I thought, critical race studies, critical modern language pedagogy, my God, that's a fabulous idea. And it brings to the fore the point I was trying to pick out a little bit of mine, was the importance that how language learning is innately political. In this current environment, this current country, language learning is highly politicized. Learning languages is a position, it's a statement position of one's place in the world. 14-year-old kid in the valleys learning French is from Wales, is placing themselves open to the world in a way that the loss of language study in schools. I mean, one of the most depressing stats I can give you is that in the whole of Wales, only 70 people did German A-level last year. 70 people in the whole of Wales. So you can see that what we're looking at is a critical loss of language pedagogy across Wales in particular, and I'm sure across the UK as well. So therefore, I think even choosing to study a language and how you study it, and in what way, with which pedagogical practice. So you don't see language learning as a neutral activity. Pedagogies are not neutral activities. There's a very strongly decolonizing approach one can take to learning a language, any language. I think there's a big onus on our teacher community in schools to grasp the mettle of a language as shape, and the critical values and the critical approaches and the political stakes of learning any language. Learning Welsh in Wales is political. Learning French in Wales is political, because they're a standpoint on one sense of oneself in the world. And I think, and I take Matthew's point about the bigger environmental issues, but as the sort of language person linguist questions that were given, it is a really, really self-reflective look in the mirror phase for language teachers at the moment in the UK. And I think, and shape, I think, helps us think through why and how we do what we do and why it matters. And if I think shape's important to the very essence of being a linguist.
Nice. Wenshin, did you want to come back in?
Yes, because I sort of like Claire has just mentioned something that I've always wanted to address and bring up, in this context, which is the loss of languages, right, during this COVID pandemic. And I started out by emphasizing on the centrality of multilingualism, right, and word literature, right, as possible part of our responses to the COVID-19, is precisely because of this paradox, right? as we see communities access, right, sources of information through multilingualism, and yet languages are disappearing from school curriculum, and students are discouraged from studying language. And if you think of, and maybe because I'm speaking from a sort of a sense of crisis at SOAS, you know, many of our African languages, and the African languages, right, are languages of London communities, right? They're disappearing. Indian languages are disappearing. Any language that does not sort of make money, let's put it this way, is disappearing. And with the disappearance of these languages, literatures, curriculum, and humanities are also disappearing. And yet these are so important now, right, for us to work out, you know, our global community that we are all, right, we all have a stake in this, what happens in global community, and how we each individual behave in this global community, right? And all that is undermined, right, while we see how important that is as part of the response to COVID-19.
Wonderful, great. We've got some questions coming in the chat box, and I'm going to just turn to them next. But just before we do that, and this is really open, so anybody from the panelists who might want to respond to this, I really loved, Claire, your idea of languages are shaped by STEAM, but languages open doors to other worlds, open doors to other worlds. I just thought that was really wonderful. Could we all just think of a quick example each, either in your interaction with your creative partners? This could be at the school level, this could be artists, museums, it could be scientists, it could be business people, it could be a politician, who knows? If you could just give us a quick instance where the use of language or the use of multilingualism allowed you to open up your experience or other experience to other worlds. A quick example, please, each, if we can.
I don't mind going first.
Yeah.
So I'm going to refer to a project that we just worked on recently around a project called Talking Tools, which is working around well-being with young people. And we were developing a prototype for this particular app. And the language was really important. And we wouldn't have been so successful with it if we hadn't brought those young people on board. So we had the artists, we had the young people, we had the web developers, and bringing that collaboration together, having the young voices who were just fantastic. It really helped us to develop a strong case study, and yeah, it was amazing.
That's a big example. Thank you, Sophia. Claire.
Yeah, I wanted to mention a really COVID relevant actually project. So there's this wonderful book produced by a colleague called Helen Patuk called My Hero Is You. It's a book about COVID, and Helen has written it and illustrated it, and it's been supported by the Intergovernmental Agency of the World Health Organization. And we at Cardiff, we helped translate it into 5 Indigenous languages in Namibia, to be able to, for the young people, it's aimed at kids, you know, about 9 to 12, to understand how to respond to COVID. I think it's in over 200 languages now on the WHO site, and that just responds to Winchi and Matthew's, you know, very strong plea that we think through the multilingual nature of responding to the crisis, and that was a moment when we at Cardiff were working with a colleague in America, colleagues in Namibia, and the colleague in London, Helen, and we talked through precisely about how to translate that into you know, very broad range of languages, and to enable that support for young kids, you know, 9 to 12-year-olds in junior schools, how to respond to in a sensitive and, you know, and constructive way to what to do about transmission of COVID-19 in Namibia or across the world, but it was about how it relates to them. And that was a really, like, you know, eureka moment for how languages and how language learning and language awareness and language sensitization is key to keeping people safe. And that to me said it all, really.
Very nice. Anybody else from the panel? You don't have to, if you haven't got one, that's fine. Anybody else? Matthew, and then Patricia.
Okay, I'm going to do 2, and the first is, you know, I just love reading books, and so the first example is the kind of traditional one of starting to learn Italian when I was 15, 16, and starting to read Dante's Divina Commedia and just being taken into, in fact, the other world, you know, another world, and just the kind of exhilaration of that. So it's a kind of, you know, intellectual and imaginative, but also kind of deeply personal and emotional and, kind of life-changing experience, really kind of entering into a new literary text in a different, and being in a, and that can happen with English text as well, but being in a different language is also part of that. The other example I wanted to give is a more surprising one, which is shows the interrelation between languages and technology. So this is an academic thing in a way. In a project that I've got looking at thinking about many translations of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, and I was trying to find ways of using digital humanities to help that. And I had lots of conversations with people in the UK, and it hadn't worked at all. Like they weren't understanding me. And I happened to be in Pisa for a literary reason. And I got talking to the digital humanities people there. And suddenly they were the people who were interested in doing the thing that I wanted to do. And the reason for that was a particular kind of way of bringing computer power to bear on the analysis of literary texts had developed in the digital humanities department at the University of Pisa. And graduates from that place were in Poland and they were in France. And there was just this really exhilarating meeting we had with people on a screen. It was all in Italian, obviously, and we were just suddenly the kind of the thing I wanted to do became possible there in a way it hadn't in the UK. And I think that's quite an interesting instance of something that you sort of think, okay, this is a computer stuff, surely that can just all happen in English. But actually it was to do with the culture of thinking and the culture of approach to literature that made these questions seem interesting to them. And so that was what kind of prompted them to start doing the kind of analysis that I was also interested in. So that's quite an unusual instance, I think.
Yeah, but a lovely one. And it ties in nicely to Sophia's earlier point about collaborating in different and perhaps unintended ways as well through arts and shape and steam. Nice. Patricia, please.
Thank you. I just want to say in the Global South and in Africa, where I do my research, language learning has always been political, especially since the colonial period. Young people are still dissuaded from speaking, in some countries, from speaking their local languages or their birth language in the classroom, where English or French is the language of education. So yes, and I mean, I think from my experience, I could talk about when I was doing research from my DPhil and when I carry out research amongst refugee communities in Western Tanzania. I had to learn Kiswahili because they didn't speak English and some spoke French, but not very well. So I had to learn Kiswahili and some bits of Kirundi in order to be able to communicate with the refugees in order to do my research. And what was interesting was that they thought me highly uneducated because most of them could speak several languages, and that's one of the things we forget is that they are multilingual. There are lots of local languages that they can speak, and they revel. There was some considerable amount of enjoyment in speaking different languages, and I think that they were being creative as well. And one of the things in terms of my decolonial work, I remember going to a workshop at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts, and we were talking about terminologies and understand what concepts for understanding local conditions and how sometimes English doesn't have the right word, right? So for example, I think, and if I can remember, we're thinking about words like, is there a word, which languages, and Wen-Chen can tell me this, which language has a word for a mother who has lost a child? And I think I was told Arabic has, but some languages don't. Right? And we were trying to say, is it a legal reason? Is it legal? What? So we were coming up with terms that explain conditions that are important or ways of being and emotions that are important in different cultural contexts, which we can't explain in English. Right. And so we thought, well, we need to put together a decolonial dictionary, but we've never got, we didn't start. But yeah, that's where, and so I encourage my PhD students to think about, to learn the local languages, if possible, to ask people about the terminology they use to describe something and to explain in their language, that terminology. Right? because sometimes those local terminologies are better suited, to provide explanation. I'm talking to linguists, so I'm a bit careful here than English itself. And I can see that in terms of black women, black academics in North America, come up with these terms all the time to explain, the black, our condition. Because we realize that there's sort of vacuum in English. It doesn't really, the language doesn't work for us in the way that, we come up with English terms, as Matthew was saying, we sort of unpack the language and be creative.
No, thank you, Patricia. Wenxin, did you want to come in quickly then before we take questions from the...
Very quickly. And I was a little bit embarrassed as a multilingual person, teaching different languages, that I couldn't come up with an example. But I want to on the spot. Yeah, and today I seem to be thinking about the social a lot, right? So this year I taught on a course called Languages of the World, and one of the things I did was, the kind of work we did within our project, Creative Multilingualism, and I asked the students questions about, if you think in different languages, do you find that you think differently when you change languages? That's question number one. And the question number one, do you emote differently? Right, and these are sort of like social behavior. So in a class of about 30, right, we have about 40 languages. So all the students are at least bilingual, if multilingual. And they sort of sat down and thought, we never thought about this before. And once they started sort of like thinking about these two questions, all of them said yes. And they gave examples that, yes, we think differently about this issue. So if we use Italian, we think about it this way. If we use French, we think about it this way. And in terms of feeling and expressions of feeling, emoting, right? Different languages have different sort of body language in different ways for people, like persons, to express their feelings. So, this is an example.
No, it's a very good example. Thank you. I'm now going to go to questions. So first question is from Becky, and Becky is from York St John University. Thank you, Becky. Dr. Becky Muradis-Taylor, if I've said that correctly. And she says, I wonder if the panel has thoughts on how to increase access to SHAPE subjects for students from less privileged backgrounds in the UK. I agree that it's important that we talk about the importance of SHAPE research and study, but I worry that it's being concentrated in universities that few students can access. So very much a question here about class and social exclusion. Can I perhaps come to Claire first of all on that one, maybe?
You sure can, Rajinder, because I can give a really good example about the closure of languages at Aston University. Because as the chair of the University Council of Modern Languages, we campaign very heavily around the loss of languages at Aston. We campaigned very heavily about 2 years ago at the impending and now definitive loss of languages at the University of Hull. And I have, as the chair, spoken to very senior university figures at both those universities. And it is interesting how those university senior figures explain and justify their decisions. So they will say, it's because we want to move to become a technical university. And as you've just rightly said, Sophia, how can you have good technology and creativity if you don't have a very strong arts and humanities critical mindset? But in those colleagues' minds, by reducing languages or replacing them or eradicating them effectively from the curriculum, they somehow believe that that's going to give them a focus on technology. Or they will often routinely, routinely give you an economic argument. We can't recruit the students. Well, that's partly because maybe you haven't got your strategy right. That's because you're maybe not thinking holistically enough about what makes a rounded graduate. So I think it's a real problem, Becky, because actually it does tend to be at the be in the gift of the senior leaders. And if they're not convinced of the value, and often it's an economic value of a subject, and they're not prepared to invest in creative methods for recruitment, then I'm afraid what happens is you get cold spots. And the British Academy is doing a project around cold spots for humanities subjects around the UK, and there are definitely cold spots where the senior leaders in those universities and those sectors have a very, I would say, potentially cloistered view about what they think their students want. And the challenge that you face, Becky, is you've got to commit to senior leaders about widening their vision a little bit potentially, and thinking about different ways to recruit. Because the Oxford University is not the same at Cardiff, isn't the same as Birmingham City, it isn't the same at University of Lincoln. You need to have very tailored strategies, and some of our university leaders tend to focus on the economic argument, and they'll make it in a very unilinear way. They won't look at their students, they'll look at their recruitment figures, which are not the same thing. And I think that is breaking that link between recruitment and student, and looking at widening horizons that one has to do. But that does require, and I'm going to be critical here, creative senior leaders, and maybe we need more of people in this room here, like Patricia, creative thinkers in those senior leadership roles. Because once you've got a managerial colleague in that role who looks at just the numbers on the page, that's when you get loss. But it is a difficult one. It's about having people like ourselves and beyond being in those senior roles, because they have to make the case right from the top.
Thank you, Claire. Anybody else from the panel? I remember when I arrived at BCU in 2016 and STEAM House was kind of underway, and I accompanied a group of colleagues to North America, and we went on partly a fact-finding mission about STEAM as we were developing phase 1 of STEAM House. And the reason we went to North America was because STEAM had already been pioneered and developed at a pace in North America. And one of the things that we found out there was that STEAM curriculum had worked its way initially from the universities to a STEAM curriculum in the high schools, so their GCSE equivalent. So they had actually managed through their parliament equivalent, through their legislature and their lobbying, that STEAM in a transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary way was to be taught not just at universities, in specialized universities, but also in high schools as well. So perhaps this is also a challenge for us of thinking about, either as we move or think about baccalaureates, of thinking about A-levels or not, and actually thinking about a STEAM curriculum, something that I know colleagues at BCU are thinking about, but also thinking about perhaps an interdisciplinary curriculum around SHAPE. Is that also a way in which this could be filtered down into FE and hopefully even into classrooms as well? So Becky, I hope that answers your question, and feel free to come back in the chat box at all at any point there. Great. Anybody else from the panel wanted to come back on that before we move on to the next question?
Just to say, I think there's a part of Italy where the young people have to do a STEAM module going forward, which is fantastic. But there is, we've talked about languages tonight, but there's also something about communication. So how do we use that language to communicate effectively to those different groups and, you know, young people, businesses, to celebrate that, the importance of that STEAM or SHAPE approach? That needs to be looked at as well, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. Communication is just as important as the language that we're using. Very good, very good. And if I may, I'd like to stick with STEAM here, because Sophie, it was wonderful I've not been back on campus since March last year. So, you know, there could be trees growing out my office by now, I don't know, or the STEAM building could have literally sprung up in those wonderful graphics that you've put up. I'm really looking forward to being back on campus when I'm actually allowed to. But one of the things you showed us in those slides was a kind of a physical manifestation of buildings, which are partly open plan, which were partly forward looking, which act as an umbrella to bring together different constituencies. What are some of the challenges of trying to bring together that ecosystem, an ecosystem where you have languages, science, technology, business people together? Could you just share some of the things that you've learnt along the way, perhaps?
Yeah, I think obviously it's a new model, so you're stepping into the unknown slightly. But when I say stepping into the unknown, not entirely, because we've done a lot of research over 2.5 years of research, speaking to businesses, speaking to members, speaking to academics, and it's just bringing all of those different faculties and businesses together to help them to realize what the benefits are of working collaboratively and not working in silos. I think that is going to be the biggest challenge, because you get faculties, you get businesses that are so used to working in a certain way. When you try and, you know, change that process, some people rebel. But we have been running things called sprints, so STEAM sprints, where we've been working with businesses that have a particular challenge, and we will get around 12 to 16 people, and it's all been online, and we've looked at a specific challenge and we've looked at different scenarios for them, we don't always find a solution, because that isn't the purpose of the sprint itself. It's to make sure that you are speaking the same language and that you're communicating. So that's at the forefront of it. But it's been really successful. But there are, you know, I think we've got to test it and deal with the challenges that come up. But it's really exciting, and it's been well received by people that have heard about it. And yeah, I think it's going to change how BCU move forward.
Thank you, that's really helpful. And also I think, you know, we've heard of blended teaching or blended learning, not least because of the pandemic. So a lot of us are online, and some of us for practical lessons are on campus, or there's talk of having blended environments going forward. So can we think about blended buildings or blended research or blended classrooms in a positive way as one of the things to take forward from the pandemic environment? And I think that the SHAPE subjects, the STEAM subjects, could be key in helping and thinking about what those models look like, not just in the sense of, oh, we've, you know, 20% or 50% of us have to stay at home because of the virus, but actually how can we make a classroom environment work better for us, which enables us to deliver some of the language learning, some of the scientific learning that we might need there. Great. If I'm not mistaken, I think there was a question from Catherine. Yes, there is. So this is Catherine Cole, who's our co-director. Catherine, would you like to come on and ask it yourself? Wonderful.
So what I was wondering was to what extent, or how SHAPE might help to bring into the foreground the importance of linguistic diversity specifically for the sciences, where there tends to be a sense that almost sciences are kind of language neutral, whereas of course nothing could be further from the truth. And I think one of the problems that we have with languages is that often for English speakers in a UK or American environment, in an English speaking environment, it is obvious what language you speak. You're not very aware of language difference. The less you learn languages and the less opportunity you have to learn languages. And I think that's a huge problem in the UK, and increasingly so, partly because languages are optional from GCSE or even at GCSE. And so numbers are dropping at all the time. But science is all being taught through language, through terms, through philosophical concepts. And we've heard earlier about the importance of philosophy in teaching science. But actually, of course, philosophy is language dependent, it's culture dependent. And it means that, for example, if I was talking at a conference on sustainability goals, that somebody who was teaching children in Senegal how to use terminology in Wolof, but he was actually having to translate and find new terms in Wolof for existing scientific terms, so that it becomes a real issue of access, that either you learn English and then you can participate in the scientific conversation, or you don't learn English, you don't know it as well perhaps as people who grow up in an Anglophone country, in which case you're excluded from the conversation. And there may then not be the expertise to even establish equivalent terms or find ways of translating between different worldviews, which may have very, very different takes on questions such as a pandemic, on questions such as health, grief, and so on, as Matthew was saying. And I'm just wondering how that dimension could be strengthened, and SHAPE is an obvious way to do so.
Would like to come in and respond? Patricia.
Okay, I'm the non-linguist here, so I will say my piece first. And I was thinking about that. Obviously, you know, again, from my experience in researching in Africa, in some countries where there's a language, certainly in East Africa, where Kiswahili is one of the national languages, there have been attempts to translate scientific terms into Kiswahili. But in other instances, obviously there's a lot of contestation about that, because and debates about the teaching of Kiswahili in schools and in and so on, university, and that's ongoing debate, because there are concerns that Tanzanians, for example, will be disadvantaged by having their education in Kiswahili, disadvantaged globally, not locally. But I was thinking about the way in which people use language through poetry, through songs, and local languages. And these are mechanisms through which, all sorts of new terms, for example, are communicated. Particularly around social media and so on, and how they quickly get they quickly get translated, I suppose, by everyone, or by musicians, or by somebody. But there's sort of active creation of these, a translation of these terminologies into local languages that that people can understand and in a modern and give meaning to. Okay, non-linguists have had their say. I keep quiet now.
No, that's very clear.
I just want to bring it really, really, really very much home and catch when I know what I'm talking about, because I know her son's a medic. But there's a student at the University of Cardiff who's doing a Welsh dictionary of medical terms for new terms in Welsh that aren't available in the Welsh language. So a student's doing a PhD here at Cardiff, a medic, looking at the way in which terms that are currently being used in the NHS and more broadly new terms have been put into Welsh. So I think it's here in the UK, Indigenous UK languages. Also, there is a challenge around scientific language and language usage. So I think we need to be minded that this is not this isn't only a story about, as it were, like the diffusion and internationalization. It's about also in the UK and Indigenous languages. How can Scottish Gaelic and Welsh, and other languages prosper if they're not intimately connected with the language of science and progress and technology? So I think it was reported as an odd story. It's not an odd story if you live in Wales, that you have to think through how you're going to create and use appropriate terms for medical investigation and innovation. Yeah? And again, having a student who's doing a PhD, a medic, and also is bilingual in Welsh and can think through the interface between English and Welsh as languages of caring and languages of medical technology advancement. That's an interesting project. So, he's a linguist, is a he, but he's also obviously, a student of medicine who understands that cultural interface. So I think we need to be mindful that it isn't always an issue that relates to English abroad. It's about English at home as well.
Mm. Very good, lovely. I'm just going to look at the questions and comments box just one final time, just make sure I haven't missed anybody, as we are almost to time. No, there's nobody. That's great. I think that's been a fascinating 90 minutes, really enlivened and enriched by my panelists. Can I thank, first of all, Professors Patricia Daly, Claire Guerrara, Wen Chin Yang, Matthew Reynolds, and of course, Sophia Tarr from our very own BCU. It's been wonderful to be part of this conversation. Thank you ever so much again for spending the first part of your evening with us. We hope you found this discussion useful and enlightening in some ways, and useful in terms of creating new networks. Please do reach out and stay in touch with us. We're easily found as Creative Multilingualism in any search engine, but also by the Torch website. Would like to thank our colleagues at Torch, not least Nikki, working behind the scenes. Thank you ever so much for being part of us. Good evening.